Flowscapes, Formscapes and Mindscapes. Or if they were put in order, Formscapes, Flowscapes and Mindscapes. What's the storyline behind this title? Formscapes is a reference to a very, very good YouTube channel by a man named Killian, who explores integral philosophy in a very detailed and exquisite manner, very articulate, and offers a point of view that's reconciling modern takes and very ancient ones, as opposed to more fragmented views. So what are landscapes? A landscape is a fixed form. It's the track of the matrices of interactions between what was, what is, and what aspires to be. In the songlines of the ancient Aboriginals, the landscape is the tracks of the travels of the dream ancestors in the dream world before its actual manifestation of fossilization in reality. Landscapes of Earth, landscapes of greenery, hills, mountains that we see around us, is the living track of the undercurrents, unseeable, invisible oftentimes, underground currents of the earth fire and the earth solids, above ground currents of water and air, and the celestial currents of the sky, the celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, their attraction, the celestial objects thrown into the ground like comets, asteroids, cosmic dust. So all these with the living beings evolving around. And what we call living is mostly things that move at a scale that we can see or consider. All these create these landscapes. And the landscape is sort of a snapshot of a much more dynamic and much more flow-like scenery. It's frozen music, frozen waves. It's an architecture of natural forms, blended now with the architecture of what we would call human form, which is just a subset of the natural imbued with certain emergent properties. What's the actual logic of exploring a topic like formscapes, mindscapes, and flowscapes? Forms relate to what is, to the elements, blocks of perception. Flows relate to change, movements, which are changes in the relative configurations of the blocks, or internal changes of the relative configuration of the elements of these blocks, like the smaller scale in the nested systems or the hierarchy, the constituent elements. Mindscapes relate to consciousness, the nous, the mind, the spirit, so that the building blocks of the universe can actually exist. They need to be perceived. So the term mind and perception is often used in a very limited acception of the term. So we anthropomorphize everything, but not in the usual sense. Since things do not perceive the way we perceive, they are thought as senseless. Since they do not link information, connect information, or select information in the way we do, we think of them as mindless. And since they do not move or change or act or will the way humans do, we think of them as non-animated, devoid of anima, devoid of soul, devoid of some inner activation, some inner will. Formscapes are shaped by flowscapes. The landscape is the actual result of the movements of the 5 elements, or 6 or 7 or 2 or 3, whatever scale you decide to use. In 2, landscape would be the interacting result of the sky and earth meeting, blending, fighting, opposing. In 4, they would be the result of fire, energy, light, heat, air, water, the flows, liquids, and earth, the solids, the dense matter. To that we add life, and we get the 5 elements as described in the Chinese philosophy, Taoist philosophy, for instance, with wood depicting life. So it's not exactly depicting life, but for practical uses, I'll translate a Chinese system which is analogical, symbolic, and resonant, and I'll simplify it into a more practical system for modern uses, where wood is replaced by life or lives in the limited meaning of the word, because the large meaning of the word, everything evolving from its natura, its inherent properties at birth. Everything that changes from this origin point can be said to be living. In the limited sense of the word, living depicts beingness that's strongly animated and self-reproducive, gifted with what's called sometimes autopoiesis, the ability to renew itself, to recreate itself and expand itself. Let's not go into too much details. Life is one element added to the 4 other elements. So in Chinese classical elements or phase wuxing, you'd have metal replacing air, and we can use metal in a 6-element systems as depicting technology, for instance. But for now, it won't matter. All these big constituents of the lived experience of the world interact and shape the world. They shape forms in a solidified manner, in the material and physical plane. They shape minds in the analogical or symbolical aspects, where fire could be, in its aspect of light, fire would be consciousness. It could be transformation. It could relate to anything from the warmth of the heart or like emotions to any alchemical transformative process. Earth would be the solid basis, the ground of things, the granularity that can be explored and touched and lived. Air would be the anima, the blowing breath of the world, which in other systems could be called ether too, and it could be differentiated completely. So ether, prana, chi would be the essence of change that allows for existence out of non-beingness, the infinite potentialities. So mindscapes are the landscapes of consciousness, awareness, perception, and these perceptions can be the perceptions of stones, the perception of atoms. So that with which we take in the Latin root, in which we take other matter, other energy, or other information. Mindscapes define formscapes. The forms that appear are forms that pre-exist or as categories in the mind, perceiving it. And before that, in the interpretation of the flow by the senses, by any interpretive medium like the brain or central nervous system for humans, and other levels obviously. So relationship of formscapes, flowscapes and mindscapes. One explores the ontology. Another one would explore the morphology or the morphogenetics, the evolution, the change movements. And the last one would explore epistemology, what can be known, what are the categories of knowledge, and through what can they be known. Epistemologies as well as phenomenologies. What are the events as they are experienced by us. Formscapes in itself is a very good basic tool to explore relationships of beingness and action. So the YouTube channel that I mentioned is a very deep dive into philosophy, modern, Christian, classical philosophies. The only limitation I would put on it, as far as a very, very deep and in some ways revolutionary approach to the thought process and philosophy in general. Revolutionary doesn't mean that Kilian is creating all these things, but it's more that the way it is approached binds together content that most of the time is not put together, except by weirdos, some people from very different background, from professional philosophers or professional scientists, amateurs in the noble sense of the word, like people who love something, get a deep interest, a deep curiosity in it, but for some reason did not get herded or did not decide to go the main pathway into normative science or normative religion, normative philosophy or whatnot. So the main problem that I see for an integral approach is still this deep divide between intellectual endeavors and practical ones, and then energetic, emotional, social, psychic, spiritual. The after effect of a big movement of densification of information through the Middle Ages, growing into the Renaissance, and more and more with the accrued materialization of the world, when materialism took over idealism or religiosity as the main frame of reference for thought in more and more modern times, evolving into the end of the 20th century and beginning of the 21st century, which mark both the epitome of the materialistic frame of mind and its downfall. So what we see during this era is a greater specialization, and the scientific papers or scientific work became smaller and smaller and smaller in scope, in many ways in originality too, as the science moved from a loving endeavor, a labor of love made by amateurs, to a professionalized career. And obviously this cycle would relate to many developments you find in all organizations, as depicted by George Land and many others in the many different frameworks used. Or the most simple one of which would be maybe George Land's forming, norming, and transforming, linked and separated by breakpoints or crises, which are alerts or alarms to the limits that a former stage is reaching. So now, how do we link philosophy and practices? How do we link the physical realm, the energetic realm, the emotional realm, mental realms, social realms, beyond simple idealization? So that's the task I endeavor to not accomplish but to open in these videos. And this task goes through the linking of commonalities, analogies, what's common in between what's different. Analogies are sometimes homologies, not in the technical biologic meaning of the name, but homologies meaning studies of things that are the same. They are the same across scales. They are the same across classifications. So many things are deemed different. Say the vascularization of a plant and the road system. They are explored as different things, yet they are often used as analogies, one for the other. So for all the commonalities they share, one can be used as a metaphor for the other. And this metaphor can then open other ways of thinking about it that are linked to this other field. So a game of analogies is a whole exploration of what's common, what's different, and how some differences can still be translated into new emergencies of understanding or creativity in previous field of inquiry. The homologies I speak about would be the roads and vascular systems of plants, animals, or even rivers. They are not simply a resemblance. They're not a similarity of shape. In many ways, they do the same thing. They are the same thing. They are circulation pathways. By these similarities, like this exact sameness of function, for instance, here, it could be said that they are not analogous, they are homologous. They are the same thing. It's a small technical, maybe fussing, but we'll see later maybe that it can have some importance. So when I say that the shapes relating to functions and movements are the same for matter, energy, and information, it's in this aspect. They are homologous or analogous in practical terms. So if we go back to my basic depiction of what we can do, one of the first tools we can use to emit, receive, and deflect energies, matter, and informations, we'll split the field into three basic categories: playing with shapes, hollows, bumps, concave, convex, flat, spreading, hollowing shape, convex shape, flat shape, spreading, distributing. A hollowing shape is an emptying shape, as we saw. As an operation, it's a subtraction from the ground of things, from the horizon. You retract something. So if I keep the same amount of matter, you would see that what I actually retract is the width. I folded a napkin, so I link a paper between here and here. When it's folded, it covers the same surface, same length, but distributed differently. This space, as measured on horizontal line is now shorter, obviously because another space was created on another axis or another plane. When I receive information, I have to do the same. If I receive consciously, I create more emptiness so that I can be filled. I decrease the density, the relative proportion of fullness and emptiness inside, which is felt in the end as density of the material and the density created by the superficial tension and by the inner pressure. The inner pressure derives also from the actual material. So the internal structure of the material will determine, in many ways, the closeness of the constituent elements. Many other aspects, if you go deeper, you'd find the same problematics explored in chemical bonds, different electrical charges creating attraction, repulsion, whatnot. So this would link to what later we call articulations or connection between things. But at first, the three main categories will suffice: changing shapes or forms. The first change is getting closer to emptiness, vacuity, formless infinity or non-existence, boundlessness, ground of all being, the origin in some ways, the ground of all non-being also. So this infinite, indefinite, to be infinite must include the finite, and to be indefinite must include the definite. If infinity does not include the finite, it is not infinite. It has created its own border, its own limit, its own end, where the term finesse in Latin springs from. So defining is putting the borders in between ideas, the same as in between territories. Definition is an actualization of borders between differentiation. So what we get back to is this creating of more empty shapes or more filled shapes, both through shaping, moving. You see, if this space is filled, separating two armies, it can either remain the same and be crossed, or it can be extended. So for as long as there is space in between the two armies, the actual contact and fighting or interaction will not take place. Interaction, hand-to-hand interaction, like closed interactions. As the reverse would appear, if both armies are getting closer together, they are emitting towards each other. They're filling in the emptiness with their fullness, their being. So the more emptiness you have, the more you allow for existence. The less defined things are, the more they allow for the actualization or manifestation of potentialities that lay dormant before in the non-materialized, non-actualized forms. So absolute emptiness, the vacuity, void of mythologies or cosmologies, is at the same time absolute potentiality of beingness. Something that's filled cannot be filled by something else at the same scale and same level. If this object is here in space and time, I cannot put another object of the close relative density and same material level. I cannot superpose them without extreme spending of energy that would break both of them, or fuse them, or dissolve them. So the reverse is everything that moves towards fullness is an aspect of the materialization process, of the actualization, manifestation process, of which materialization is a late extension. If I want to emit an idea, I need to fill myself with information, either through my own storage and recombination of information, or through the flow that I allow through me. So I can be filled from the inside, finding some inner source, or from the outside, transmitting, repeating from an external source, which the nuances between both can become blurred in some deeper aspects. So if we have forms linked or shaped or creating movements, which are changes in forms, we have in between and prior the field of information that allows for the mutual perception of what's happening. So a tree falls in the forest. Does it exist if no one is there to see it? Well, it sure does exist for the tree and its own sentient beingness. For all the inhabitants of the tree, or all the amensal creatures living on the tree trunk, on the tree branches, in the tree itself, under the bark and whatnot. It would surely exist also for the shrubs or other trees on which the tree falls, or for the ground and the beings of the ground. But even if the only perceiving creature were the mud, it would still be perceived, it would be received and leave a track, a memory of some type. So in this aspect, the mindscape is the global landscapes of information, forms, ideas, perceptions. A very old way of seeing the world is as a huge symphony of sound, a huge vibration. And this worldwide scale or universe scale, the vibration can be tuned in many different ways. All the scales of of vibrations, of a vibrational spectrum, could translate into each other if you imagine a string that fills the universe. All the halves or double of the same frequencies would resonate through all scales. We call light a certain like band of frequencies perceived through certain mediums or certain tools of perception, and translated through certain tools of interpretation and narratives, certain parts of the brain, for instance. We call sound other types, other bands of vibrations. And in bands, we often use wavelength, but the differences that would separate light from sound would extend beyond that. So we would need to picture broader difference, like broader scope of differences between waves to get the full picture. Shapes in this instance would be a specific pattern of vibration. So say a cymatic creation of shape by a certain frequency emitted in a certain medium by certain types of emitters would create this aspect. A shape in this aspect is another resonance of much lower wavelength of a frequency of sound that appears as a frequency of light too in its appearance.